it's just really difficult to try to find a solution. And we had talked about giving them PAPRs. So those are expensive though. And now that there's a solution through CAPRs, I mean, this is just an amazing find. And I think the staff would be ecstatic to have something like this.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
On this vendor spotlight on Beyond Clean, we speak with Ken Arthur, Director of Sales West, and Desiree Acedo, Clinical Education Specialist. They are going to be coming on to talk about MAXAIR Systems. You might not have heard of them, but they have a technology that's well established. You might have heard of the PAPR. They also have the CAPR, and this is going to give you protection in decon. It's going to cool you off, and it's not going to burden you down by weighing a lot. We're going to learn about it and a lot more coming up in this spotlight, so stay with us. We're going to be back with Ken and Desiree in just a few short minutes.
From the studios at Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining me now is Ken Arthur, Director of Sales for the West, and Desiree Acedo, Clinical Education Specialist with MAXAIR Systems. You know, we're going to be talking today about how sterile processing professionals work in these high exposure environments where splash and droplet dispersion are, you know, real realities. And I think even overheating. We're going to dive into all of this and also kind of an interesting way that, Ken, you and your team found your way into sterile processing and working with Desiree. So I'm excited to tell your story today. And I thought maybe we could start with some introductions to each of you. And Ken, why don't you go first?
Sure. Yeah. Again, my name's Ken Arthur. I'm the Director of Sales for the Western region for MAXAIR Systems. I've been with MAXAIR since about 2010. So it's been a while. And I started off as an independent sales rep, which is our basic sales model, and ended up becoming the Director of Sales right around the time of COVID. So crazy time. I got hired on directly with MAXAIR and been helping and supporting our reps in the Western region, which is roughly half the country, including Hawaii and Alaska. Work with a bunch of really great people out in the field and loving it. It's a great product and a lot of fun to sell and show.
Well, Desiree, Ken might have been a little newer to sterile processing, but you certainly are not. Can you talk about your sterile processing background and career?
Absolutely. So 30 years I've been in the field between surgical and sterile processing, both on the technician side, working on the floor, as well as on the leadership side. And it's something that I'm very passionate about, you know, taking care of patients and making sure that everything that touches that patient is the safest. So when they go home in a better condition than when they came to us.
What a great philosophy that is.
Yeah. And, you know, I think a lot of times the people that are working in sterile processing are working in some pretty unique environments, right, Desiree? And so I'm sure as in that leadership role, you've probably fielded a few complaints over the years.
Quite a few, yes, from every side. You know, you've got surgical techs, you've got surgeons, you've got your sterile processing techs, you've got supply. Everybody's coming at you. So you're going in circles, and it can be stressful, but it is also, you know, again, because of the passion I have for the job, it's also something I enjoyed. Obviously, because I did it for as long as I did. But in those challenges, I learned a lot. And that's helping me in what I do now, which is going out and educating other people so I can help improve their areas as well.
Yeah, process improvement it's a continuous process, but it's also one that requires a little bit of experience, which is kind of why I asked you that question, because you got to face problems to know how to solve them. And Ken, it's interesting because I mentioned at the beginning, you were newer to SPD, but MAXAIR is not new to the hospital. This might be an introduction to many of the SPD listeners today, but MAXAIR is an established manufacturer. So I thought maybe you could give us a little bit of an overview of the company, and then we can start to tell the story of how you found your way to sterile processing.
Sure. And thanks for that opportunity, Justin. So MAXAIR Systems as a brand has been around for about 25 years. And what that was born out of is Biomedical Devices International, which is the kind of the parent company for MAXAIR Systems, developed a surgical helmet system back even before that. MAXAIR Systems was created out of that as a means of addressing the powered air purifying respirator market. They looked at it and decided, well, that needs some improvement. The traditional PAPRs that are out there on the floors and being used are not ideal for healthcare, and they recognized that and said we can reinvent the powered air purifying respirator. And so we have a long history in helmet-based design and continuous improvement. And born out of that, of course, 25 years ago or so was MAXAIR Systems, which is a powered air purifying respirator platform that's more designed for use in the healthcare arena, as opposed to our competitors that are in that space. We compete with N95s, but there are some very stark differences between those products. So hopefully that's a good enough background as far as our experience in helmet-based design and airflow technologies and all that stuff.
Well, when we talk about PPE, personal protective equipment, there's obviously all kinds of different tiers of PPE. And so is it safe to say that this is an advanced level of PPE and that, it offers a lot more than maybe what people think of all the time when they're thinking of just basic masks and kind of gowns and gloves?
Absolutely. From a respiratory protection standpoint, which is not primary in the sterile processing arena at this point, because they typically don't fall under a respiratory protection program. But in terms of comparing a PAPR, a powered air purifying respirator, to an N95, it's exponential in terms of the protection factors. So you're talking roughly around 95%-ish for an N95 versus 99.97% for a PAPR, up to 99.99% filtration efficiency. Again, in the sterile processing world, they're not primarily concerned with aerosol transmission and that kind of thing, because we just don't see written respiratory protection programs in there. And Desiree can probably speak to that a little bit more, but I haven't run across any departments that fall under a respiratory program. But it certainly is advanced in terms of design. When we talk about comparing our PAPR, which we call a CAPR these days, CAPR is a very common term out there in the marketplace, and that's how hospitals will know us, is the MAXAIR CAPR, is certainly very advanced in terms of its design versus our competitors in that market segment. So comparing the N95s is a little difficult just because it's such a different product. Ours is a battery-powered product, but certainly much better in terms of filtration efficiency and protection and comfort and those kinds of things. It's a positive pressure device. So,
yeah, it may not be in the program that the hospitals have set up, but I do think about aerosolization, especially in decon, and you're scrubbing instruments. And, that's, I think, a big reason why you're supposed to be washing the instruments underneath the surface of the water, right? Is to prevent aerosolization. But, I think this is definitely an interesting conversation because you're right. I'm not sure that people working in sterile processing are super familiar with this type of equipment, but it solves some other problems too. And I think that's how you found your way to sterile processing. So maybe you could tell us that story, like, okay, we can definitely understand what that might have been like, during the pandemic. And you mentioned N95 masks, and anybody before 2020 who didn't know what that is definitely knows what it is now. So how did this all kind of lead to us having a conversation today?
So we hired a group that Desiree now works for called ZM Medical, based in Arizona. So anybody that's listening from Arizona that works in sterile processing knows the Maskey brothers and ZM Medical, because they know everybody in the state. And it is a true statement that some sterile processing departments are using the Stryker togas or hoods to help cool down their decon wash staff members. We didn't know that. Our reps, and we have reps all along the West Coast that call in sterile processing and nationally, but we just never called on it as a department because it doesn't fall under the respiratory protection program. And that's, usually who we are dealing with. And so Michael Maskey in Arizona was at HSPA show in Las Vegas and walking around with one of the managers of sterile processing at a hospital in Phoenix. And they were walking by the Stryker booth, and the guy, the customer, his friend, said, "Hey, we're about to trial that Stryker toga system in our decon wash, decontam, because those guys are, they're sweating, they're tremendously uncomfortable, they're under tremendous fatigue and strain." Yeah. And they had just brought our line on for MAXAIR. And I had met with them and showed it to them. And he said, "Well, we just picked up this line called MAXAIR, and it's a helmet-based system with a fan in it. It's a respirator. Do you want to see it?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, of course." And so I happened to come in for some training, and we went into this facility and showed it to the manager. And he's a well-known guy in the state. And he said, "Well, this is really nice." And he brought in his sterile processing tech, one of the ones that would wear that had trialed this Stryker toga product. And he liked it better. He said, "I'm getting more airflow." And what you need to understand is the MAXAIR CAPR is a multi-speed fan that's inside that helmet. And they're always going to run it on high, the highest speed, which is not normally the case on the floors for nursing. That's quite a bit of air. But he liked the balance of the helmet. He said it felt lighter. He got more airflow out of it. And of course, they ended up buying it. Plus, it's a lot less expensive than a sterile toga or a sterile hood that would come from Stryker. And so that's what kind of kicked it off. We sort of tripped over it accidentally, and this particular manager in Arizona wanted to promote it to the rest of his people. He's a fairly known quantity, and he wanted to promote it internally within his system, and within the rest of the organization in the state. And so what we did was kind of push that out to our reps. We ran it through my boss and our ownership and said, this is a potential market that we haven't been calling on. And it's important because these are very important people, as I learned, as the frontline first step in cleaning instruments in the sterilization process. And Desiree can speak to that more clearly than I can. But so we pushed that out to the rest of our reps and started marketing, sending out marketing materials, doing some social media relative to sterile processing, because it is, in fact, keeping them cool. It's keeping them in the gear longer. It's keeping them more productive, and they love it. And so it's really a matter of just kind of finding the right people to sell that to the higher ups in that organization for the department.
Well, the cooling is definitely a need. So Desiree, I'm very curious, like when this first came across your plate, what are some of the immediate thoughts? And, that's kind of why I asked you the question about the complaints too. Like, I'm sure that, overheating and temperature in the sterile processing decon environment has been one of the complaints you fielded the most. Like everybody's like, I don't want to go do decon again today. Some people love it. I'm not, there's some people who love it, but a lot of people are like, I don't want to go to decon. And I'd say temperature and overheating is one of those big factors.
Exactly. It's funny because I was at that Las Vegas HSPA show, and I'm kind of sad that I wasn't the one that got to be part of that launch. But no, he's absolutely right. In the decontam area, it's super hot in there. I mean, you figure you've got all these washers and the hot water that's in the sink, and then it's just all kinds of equipment back there. And then on top of that, you've got a gown that's not really breathable for the techs. And then you've got gloves on top of gloves. I mean, there's just so much going on, and they're moving a lot and lifting heavy instrument sets and all this stuff that's happening. And so, yes, they're sweating on top of all the things that's happening all over the place. And so when you stop and think about it, they're just drenched by the time they come out of the department. And so, feeling a way to cool down, what we've done in the past is we've had to give them a vest that has big blocks of ice packs in it that gets heavy over time. So then they put less ice packs in it to try to offset some of the weight. But then that doesn't do the job that it needs to do, because the ice packs don't sit really where they need it to sit in order for them to cool off. And so it's just really difficult to try to find a solution. And we had talked about giving them PAPRs. So those are expensive though. And now that there's a solution through CAPRs, I mean, this is just an amazing find. And I think the staff would be ecstatic to have something like this.
Yeah, I like how it sort of has a consolidated approach to addressing several concerns
Yes.
that come up in decon. What about like fogging and visibility? Yeah, I think about that a lot when you're over,
Yes.
the sink and it's really warm and it's a very critical job to be able to inspect while you're, brushing and cleaning the instruments.
Mm-hmm.
But with that fogging, may not always be easy to see how effective you are at doing that decontamination job at the sink side.
Oh, absolutely. I've often thought, I need those windshield wipers on my shield to get the fog off, because you've got your mask on and you're trying to breathe, and as soon as you breathe, your mask just fogs up, and it's terrible. So definitely having a way to be able to breathe and not fog up, especially for those that wear glasses. You need to be able to see. And if your glasses keep fogging up, now you can't see. So there's a safety factor there. So absolutely. Yeah. Just giving them a way to do that and still be able to wear their glasses. Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things I'd like to point out, and I think I mentioned this before, that PAPRs are powered air purifying positive pressure devices. All right. So they're giving you positive airflow, and ours is coming from the top front of the helmet. So there is no fogging of glasses. So nurses that wear this, on the nursing floors, surgeons that use our hoods, we do have some sterile hoods for surgery. It doesn't fog up the glasses. And that's a very, very important thing. In addition to providing this evaporative cooling, for something like decon wash, because as you sweat, and anybody that's listening, next time you sweat for whatever reason, if you just put a fan on you that's blowing ambient air, it feels cool. It's not that it has Freon, but it feels cool because it feels like evaporative cooling. It's the same thing as a swamp cooler, the same way that works. So it's really helping to keep these folks cool and comfortable. They're not having to fight a mask because they don't have to wear a mask with the CAPR. So they're breathing nice, of course, I won't say purified air, but certainly cleansed to a large degree, but it's keeping them cool as well. And fog free. So that's very, very important, because we want them focused on the task at hand. Ultimately, we don't want them focused on discomfort. We don't want them fighting fogging lenses. We need them, and the patients need them doing the best job that they can. And we think we facilitate that very well.
Well, and I feel like it gives them better coverage as well, because, you've got the hood part of it that covers their neck and kind of drapes a little bit over their shoulders. And so, because the gown only goes up so far, so if you have the coverage over the neck, that's going to help them tremendously. So they're not getting the gross, splashing from the water all over their neck as well. So I like that component.
Yeah, sometimes it can splash up underneath the face shield, right, Desiree? And
absolutely, yeah.
I do think that's huge. I think from a morale standpoint too, you might be cooled off with, one of those vests like you described, but then you're carrying the extra weight and that's kind of like weighing you down. It makes you sluggish. But if you're overheated, you're also sluggish. Like nobody's working at sort of the pace that they would like to. And I got to think that, helping address that experience in decon can really help with morale, because you're right. Everybody's tried to come up with a way to address this, but I've never seen anything just really take over the market and disrupt, that experience for people working in decon. And I can see the potential here for that. Ken, let's talk about, like the actual equipment, because, Desiree started to paint a picture like the current state is you've got a gown on and then you've got maybe a face shield and a mask, but your neck is exposed and you can have splash up underneath. You said it's a powered device. So I immediately, start thinking, a little bit of the NASA space suit, where I'm plugged into a long tube and I'm going out onto the moon, I think it would be good if the best you can do to describe, what this looks like for somebody who's maybe not familiar with a PAPR or the concept, versus what they're doing today.
Sure. And back in the day when I was starting out, and I'm in the Houston area, and the CAPR was new and I was new to the company and there wasn't much product down here. And the way that I used to describe it when I would make cold calls over the phone, and we also get this from people that see it at trade shows and they haven't seen it before, they say, that looks like a bike helmet. And that's the best way to describe it. It's a smooth plastic cap that is covering the filter. And then underneath that is the actual CAPR helmet itself that has the fan and the ratchet set and all that stuff. We do have of course, a hood option that doesn't use that smooth filter cover cap, but it really depends on the configuration. And that's another important point to bring out, that the capper is configurable in various ways, just depending on a variety of factors. So, but the normal configuration that we're going to get that from a visual standpoint is it looks like a bike helmet with a face shield on it. And then it's got a polyurethane cuff that goes under the chin, that sort of sits tight against the neck. Not real tight. It's a very thin membrane, very flexible. And so that's a typical configuration that you'll see on the nursing floors. For sterile processing, they kind of need some more contact protection usually. And so they're looking at shrouds that would be a similar, filter cover cap, component as well, but it'll have a shroud attached to it with the face shield that'll kind of go down over the torso. What we like to talk about, primarily is the hoods. Now, the hoods sit right on top of that helmet that has the fan in it, and it has an integrated filter. And so you don't have a separate filter piece that has to be replaced down the road. You don't have a plastic filter cover cap that has to be disinfected in between uses. And I think that's pretty important and a good distinction to draw. But really what we like to do is present these different options to the customer and have them try them on, do some routine exercises, move around, look at, things like budget, which are always going to matter, and decide from there. But it's an integrated helmet. And that's what is important to keep in mind when we start talking about differences between other PAPRs. And I realize that a lot of folks in SPD don't utilize PAPRs. They don't know what they are unless they've worked in other areas of the hospital. So this may be a little challenging to try to draw that distinction, but our helmet is integrated. And so the fan and the filter is going to be part of the helmet setup.
What about weight? Like we just talked about how the vests, the cooling vests, they're like adding a lot of weight. How heavy is the equipment?
It's all plastic except the circuitry that's in there. And so it weighs about 1.5 pounds. And so
right on.
We have a very rare occasion where somebody says, I don't like wearing something on my head, right? And that's just, you're always going to have outliers. But the buy-in on the product on the nursing floors and everywhere else is very high. The interesting thing is, and this is kind of anecdotal, but we did an SPD symposium in Southern California, not myself, but our rep down there, and was able to bring in product and have techs and managers check it out. And a lot of the techs tried it on. And when I had asked him about that, I said, well, what was the general feedback? Because this was kind of early in our foray into SPD. He said, I'd say about 100% of them loved it and said that they would wear it if they had the opportunity to do so. Finding the budget and all that is the challenge. And respective to that, we've, have worked up some amortization type programs where the capital piece can be amortized over time, and not to get too far off on that. But we do have some very creative and aggressive ways to get into the product from a budget standpoint. But yeah, the buy-in is very, very high. It's just a matter of getting it into the hands and getting it on them and letting them try it on. And typically they're just ecstatic about it.
I love the amortization aspect to this because you're comparing yourself against a consumable or multiple consumables typically, right? And so just the way that hospitals are used to paying for PPE is, a gown every use, gloves every use, all and the face shields every use. So they're used to thinking about consumables. When you think about it that way, that amortization helps them make a more accurate comparative analysis, I think, and continue to spend in a way that maybe they're used to appropriating their finances on a regular basis. The other thing about gowns too, like as we just kind of quote ECRI, which comes out several times a year with a few top 10s that I really appreciate. And in 2022, they had their top 10 health technology hazards and actually identified disposable gowns as having insufficient barrier protection and putting their wearers at risk too. So like from your perspective, Desiree, like you've seen the capper, what we're talking about. How much safer do you feel, when you're using a capper?
Well, yeah, like I was mentioning earlier, the fact that it comes down lower and gives the protection over, the neck and around the shoulder areas. I mean, just that alone gives that added protection to the staff. And then if it's coming down towards the torso, absolutely, because like you mentioned, the gowns that we have don't really protect us. I mean, they're supposed to be level 4 in our area. And we do make sure they have those level 4s, but you do get a little bit of the bleed through to the staff. And so when they leave out of there, there's that combination of them sweating, but then you have to question, well, how much of that is the bleed through from the splashing of the dirty water from the sink, right? And so you kind of leave out of there feeling gross, which is why they're required to change their scrubs. So there's the added cost component of them now having to change scrubs in addition to all the other PPE that they have to change each time they leave in and out of the department. I mean, there's all kinds of costs that go into the staff going in and out of the department that people don't realize is happening. So adding this capper, I think, is going to cut back on a lot of that, because now we don't have to purchase face shields. We don't have to purchase a mask. We don't have to purchase, I mean, we still have to purchase the gowns, but we might be able to find a better quality that can go with this capper. You know, there's always companies that are trying to come out with something better. It's just hard to find that one. You know, my hospital that I worked at previously, we were kind of the tester for certain products. They would come test it out on my staff because my staff was very vocal about what they liked and didn't like. And you should put this on it and bring. And one of the things they always said is make it so the collar comes higher. They wanted that protection around the neck because they didn't have it. So this hood and this helmet is going to give them exactly what they've been wanting.
Yeah, if I could just say real quick, also, respective of, you mentioned protection factors and AAMI level 4 and that kind of thing. And so our shroud material is certified to AAMI level 4 and ASTM standards for bloodborne pathogen penetration. So I just wanted to throw that in there to make sure that people understand that these are actually used in Ebola biocontainment units. We do a lot with BSL-3 where they're doing research on vaccines and anthrax and, you know, all kinds of crazy stuff, you know, working with animals and such. And so they need that full protection as well.
Absolutely.
And so just to let you know that and let your listeners know that our shroud materials are certified to AAMI level 4.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
You know, splashing is real. I kind of want to cite a couple of, I think, studies that caught a lot of people's attention in the industry. Mm-hmm. And I know we're kind of wrapping up here, but I think it would be good to kind of, you know, mention what these findings were and how they relate to our discussion today. So Ofsted and Associates did a couple of studies on splash generation and droplet dispersal. And so they noted one risk was demonstrated in a pilot project which found that droplets traveled 3 to 5 feet from the sink, and PPE was splashed during most activities, and that it failed to prevent exposure even when properly donned. So you might be asking yourself, as we're talking about, you know, AAMI level 4 and BSL level 3, like, what do I need that for? And I do think some of these studies sort of show us that there is an opportunity for improvement in this area, not just in terms of comfort when you're working in decon, but in terms of your own personal protection, which is why I think this is such an interesting conversation that, you know, I quite frankly have never had before around bringing, you know, a different kind of technology to get to the table that would protect you more and cool you off, because I feel like these are constant concerns. The second study, also conducted by Ofsted and Associates, used a protocol where moisture detection paper was placed on PPE. And those results were pretty eye-opening because researchers found that manual cleaning of devices generated substantial splash, drenching technicians and the environment with droplets that traveled more than 7 feet. So, you know, I know we just quoted one 3 to 5 feet, but in this study, 7 feet. And so the two studies really emphasize this risk. And, you know, in Ofsted and Associates studies previously, they had cited even when processing technicians properly donned this PPE, skin exposures also occurred. And the conclusion at the end was better PPE is needed. And so here we are having a conversation where we can make an improvement in PPE and also just make people more comfortable and hopefully improve department morale. So I really want to thank you both for coming on the podcast. I'll give you an opportunity for some final thoughts, but I'll reiterate this, you know, in our wrap up, but I do want to let everybody know to make sure that they visit you at HSPA booth 1238, because you'll have a chance to win your own CAPR system. And if you're struggling to understand exactly what we're talking about here, you can see it for yourself in Baltimore. So I want to encourage everybody to do that as well. Desiree, why don't we start with you? Any kind of final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm very passionate about sterile processing, and anytime I get to talk about this, I could go on all day, talking about how much I love the department and the various aspects of it. So I really appreciate this. And, Ken, thank you for discussing the CAPRs and all the benefits that it has. I definitely think that sterile processing staff will enjoy this once they bring it into their department. It's going to be beneficial to the staff as far as productivity and their comfort, as well as their safety. And, it just works all the way around. It touches all those checkpoints, right? For, AAMI level 4 and comfort levels and just everywhere. So I appreciate what you guys are offering to the decontamination staff in SPD. So thank you for that.
Now, I'll get your final thoughts, but I think people are going to want your contact information and website information. How can I know people are going to be curious, so you got to tell them how to get in touch with you and get some more info on their own in the meantime.
Sure. Well, at the risk of overstimulating my phone, I'd be happy to give out my number. What I would recommend that people do if they want to get more information, get some visuals, is to go to our website, which is at MAXAIR-Systems.com. And on that page, they'll see a market tab at the top, a little drop down, and they'll see sterile processing as one of the markets that we have in there. And there's some really good visuals, really good more information that they can get there. And on that same page, they can request to get in touch with a local rep. So we cover the entire country. Some of the rural areas are more difficult to get to, but we do on-site demos. These guys have product in hand, so they can get to you for the most part. We do video demos as well. But that would be the easiest thing to do. But my email address, I'll give you that, is karthur@maxair-systems.com. So if anybody wants to drop me a line, I'll certainly get you in touch with the proper manager or the proper rep, and we can get you going that way as well. But coming to the booth, I think HSPA is coming up soon. So I'm not going to be there, I don't think, but we would encourage you to come by and have a chance to win a unit. That would be great. But you could at least get hands-on with it. But to kind of wrap it up, the two pillars of what we're talking about really, and it started out with comfort. And that's how this thing kicked off. And my story down in Arizona was they just wanted to keep these guys cooler and more comfortable. And it wasn't necessarily about an increased safety factor. These Olstead studies have really kind of opened up our eyes a little bit. And so we're really kind of hammering a little bit more on the safety side as well. And so between that, I think we've got a really, really great product, better than anything else that's out there in terms of current PPE for those two reasons. So we encourage you to reach out to us, and we'd love to work with you and get it done. Get your people happier and more content, more productive.
Well, we love to see innovation here at Beyond Clean, and I can't thank you both enough for coming on the show today. I really appreciate you bringing something new to the table for the audience to consider and sort of learn a little bit more about, hopefully coming up at HSPA if they're able to attend. That was Ken Arthur, Director of Sales West, and Desiree Acedo, Clinical Education Specialist, talking about MAXAIR Systems CAPR, which is a technology we haven't seen in sterile processing, but they are an established healthcare manufacturer. They're in over 50% of hospitals. So while they're newer to SPD, they are not new to the hospital. And, as we talked about during the podcast, ECRI identified in 2022 their top 10 health technology hazards that disposable gowns had an insufficient barrier protection, therefore putting wearers at risk. And obviously we talked about the Ofsted and Associates studies as well. But honestly, what an interesting application to a lightweight, It'll keep you cool and it'll keep you more protected. So make sure you check them out at HSPA. They're going to be at booth 1238. You'll get a chance to win your own CAPR system. You can reach out to Ken as well and visit their website for more information. So I want to thank Ken and Desiree for coming on this vendor spotlight here on Beyond Clean.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.